Hello, movie lovers. Welcome home. My name is Amy Hensterling, and you are listening to Watch This List Unplugged. This is episode 2 in my passion project series, Amy's Progress, which is sort of reflective of the spiritual mental health journey that I am undergoing myself right now, sort of as an extension of that and externalizing where I am to learn as much as I can from people far smarter than me. So we have intern Mitch Capps, my buddy, who is a fellow movie lover, but also a contemplative person who is interacting with art in the way that I feel comes naturally to me. He and I will be discussing Tarkovsky's 1979 film Stalker, which I will link his excellent review to when I post this. It's something that sort of drew me to Mitch in the first place, honestly, was that his thoughts on this film. So it seemed perfect for us to cover. So hi, Mitch. Thank you so much for being willing to come along with me on this.
Hey, it's awesome to be back and under those circumstances, heightened circumstances. So thanks.
Indeed. And we are tackling something that is very well known and dense and considered one of the, but certainly best foreign films of all time, but also just like it's on Sight and Sound's best films ever made. This is a like staple in cinema. So I'm very aware of that as it is also sort of a philosophical endeavor to take on, kind of like being in a philosophy class in a way.
Yeah, it's kind of scary to be the stalker guy on your show. I mean, kind of everybody wants to do stalker, but then nobody wants to because the bar is really high.
Yes.
So, but you'll
Yes.
probably over the course of your show talk about it more.
Yeah. Well, and I think the key here too is that we're even trying. It's almost like Mitch and I were just joking beforehand that it like a light bulb went off in my head, like, oh, I want this episode basically to be Mitch and I entering the zone, which I'll have Mitch describe as he describes the film. But this is sort of our getting on the railway car, moving from sepia into color, and contemplating these things that are going to be in the film. So come along with us today as we do so. I'm very excited. And Mitch, why don't we off the bat, I want you to set people up with just the general plot. And I also want to say right at the front end that we are not going to be shy about spoilers. We're going to talk about this movie in its entirety from beginning to end. So if you have not seen it, definitely come back to this after you have. And I think you'll find it a lot more enriching anyway to do it in that order.
Okay, yeah, I can try. It's sort of one of those plots that resists summarization. But when you start, you have a guy whose vocation is a stalker, and what that is in this context is there's been what people understood as an asteroid hitting the Earth, but later came to find out was something much deeper. And a stalker is someone who takes people, who guides them through this area that is called the zone. And so he's doing that for two people, a professor and a writer. And we kind of just follow them on their journey. And as they talk as they go, it's kind of like a road movie in that way, but on foot.
True. Well, and I suppose the way, so I watched this little short clip of Ryan Johnson talking about Stalker, and he was saying that there's some future disaster basically that occurs, and they have like fenced off this area that's like a forbidden zone. And the reason that people want to go to the zone is because there is a room in the zone that is supposedly going to grant their deepest desire.
I wanted to ask you, do you get the sense that that's common knowledge to people going in?
Well, Why else would they want to go, do you think?
So the professor talks about, he's a scientist. He wants to
Mhm.
explore this place and get to the bottom of it. And the writer talks about wanting to get inspiration. And then they seem a little like, are you sure about that? When the stalker is telling them about the room and that it grants them wishes and whatnot.
Okay, so perhaps then it is that people just want to see the zone period out of curiosity, and then the stalker himself is the one who says, "By the way, there's this place in there that like Aladdin with the lamp." uh but yeah, that's an interesting point. I always assumed that the draw was the room.
Yeah, and I don't know because I almost think they don't believe him.
Mhm.
And they're constantly kind of like brushing him off when he's and kind of almost humoring him with the toss. They sort of like they don't want to distrust him too much, but they sort of also are just kind of humoring him, and they'll end up calling him a holy fool, and then they, of course, don't end up going in the room, uh,
Mhm.
which I mean, there could be other reasons besides not believing him, and some of those kind of surface. But
Well,
yeah,
Mitch,
I guess we don't know.
I would argue that, I mean, this is later in this discussion, but I would argue that the reason they don't go in the room is because they believe him,
Yeah, that's
not because they don't.
that's you're probably right on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, but okay, so yes, so the stalker seems a little bit of a mystic maybe
Mhm.
to a normal person. You're right. The writer is going because he says he's lost all inspiration, and then the professor is sort of out of curiosity. He's got a little bit of an ulterior motive though, because he
A
brings
20 kiloton ulterior
the
motive.
the bomb, which we will get to. But then, so basically, they get on this railway car. They are transported. The beginning of the movie is in like a sepia tone, and then as soon as they get into the zone, it turns into color, which is a beautiful, gorgeous sequence. And then, literally, when they step off the railway car, they see the building that has the room in it, right? And the writer's like, why don't we just walk to it? Yeah. So talk a little bit about like that whole portion and how you read that, metaphorically speaking.
Well, I don't I know you said we're spoilers here, but I'm gonna maybe spoil some other movies in a way. Uh,
That's okay.
so I saw Asteroid City recently, and you have the conceit with the meta thing going on where it starts in black and white. It's like a TV doc, but when it goes into the play that it's purportedly about, it's in color. And you see this over and over again, like in Wizard of Oz or Matter of Life and Death, where the deeper reality, the more transcendent reality, is colorized. So I didn't know if they were doing something like that with the times that they put color to the zone, which it isn't throughout the whole sequence, is it? It's not.
Well, there's portions during it where it goes back to sepia, but I think the reason that it does that is to intimate a flashback, either that or like when he's in the water, there's definitely a scene where he's clearly in the zone, but it's not color anymore. So to me, it's either letting us know that it's happened in the past or that we're back into the normal world.
Okay. So whenever I see that in movies, and this may not be the best or most even efficient way to look at it, but I always think the transcendent reality is in color because most of what we're seeing in our day to day affairs is like through a mirror dimly, and these are
Mm-hmm.
always opportunities where they're being given additional senses almost or a new capacity with which to see things as they more really are, even if not how they fully really are. So that's the sense I get about the color change. But I think you probably have some ideas about why they go the roundabout way to get to the room.
Well, that's what I want to know what you think.
Ah,
Because
nuts.
he says there's no direct way, even though it's like a couple hundred feet in front of them, and then the writer goes anyway, but is stopped at the doorway.
Yeah, right. So my knee jerk reaction is that there's no what do you call it? There's no get rich quick schemes. There's no silver
Shortcuts.
bullet shortcut to the things that are most valuable. And you have these guys, and he'll say this at the end. I'm jumping everywhere, but they're
That's
trying to
okay.
commodify everything. And he's saying you can't do that. There's a path. The road to Calvary is it's not broad. It's narrow. It's difficult. So that's sort of where my brain goes. But I'm curious where yours does.
Yeah, it reminds me of the C.S. Lewis quote, "The longest way round is the shortest way home." So it could be sort of that idea of like, if you're trying to, like you said, get rich quick, bypass, then it's not that he couldn't have walked in. He stops himself because he hears the voice saying, "Don't go any further," but he could have gone further. So there is this sense of like free will is still very present here. Like, these
That's
they
right.
he's not like actually physically impaired. He could have gone, but he chose not to.
And what about the time where he's urging the professor? He's like, "Don't go this way. Don't go back for your pack." And he's like, "He's doomed. He's gone." And then the professor, he does make it. So there's some interesting stuff going on with all of that.
Yes, and this is sort of the moment in the film where we realize. So I watched an interview with the DP where he was talking about how you think that you're in the point of view of one of the characters, and then the camera will go very, very slowly into something. And all of a sudden, you'll see the characters all walk in front of the camera. So you're actually not in the point of view that you thought you were. You're in the point of view of the zone.
That is cool.
So there's this sentient fourth consciousness happening where reality, it's almost like that film Annihilation, where reality is adapting to the people's perceptions that are there. So it's not this like static thing.
Yeah, Annihilation is almost like an essay on this movie in itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, the way that it's adapting. So when I see so you're saying it's the perspective of the zone. When I see the camera like that, I mean, because that is always our experience watching a movie. If we're not in a POV, is the camera watching the characters, the God's eye view. So that's instantly where I go. But yeah, you get the sense that they're being watched and what they do matters. But
well, that's what the DP literally said. He was like, "It is the zone watching them."
That's so cool. That is very cool.
Yeah.
So why do you think that they want you to think that it's in the POV of the character before subverting
it? Because I don't think it would have been as readily apparent that there was a perspective shift if we didn't start with one.
Uh-huh.
Do you know what I mean? It's like saying, how could you taste something different unless you tasted something before? I feel like it was like establishing
Point
that
preference,
as a way to shift and to be like, have the person walk in front behind the car. In this instance, I'm thinking of a particular zoom in, but I mean, there's also, when you said that there's the color change at the beginning, there's also a musical change because the score, as they're chugging along on the train, goes from a more symphonic sound or like a full sound to a more electronic sound. And that's also purposeful because there is a shift in reality. Like they don't have as much of a sense of time as they did when they were home. Like the first line of this film is, where's my watch? The wife says, "Why did you take my watch?" So I feel like there's just all of these things going around about
cool.
Consciousness.
Yeah, that is cool.
But I'm talking way too much, Mitch. I want to know your impressions.
Well, shoot, you bring up something that I really, in the couple of times I've watched this, only twice, I haven't really appreciated what is obvious, which is that the zone is constantly talked about as sentient. And that's just so strange and eerie and great.
And it seems to have, tell me if you think that this is the case, because Annihilation as a sort of comparison piece, okay, that one has a sort of an evil to it, or like a horror quality, whereas this one, the zone seems benevolent, or like it's trying to help them along. But what would your reading be on that?
This is, I mean, as so if you don't have a foundation, this is as difficult a question as if you start telling someone who doesn't have any understanding of God, here's something he did, then here's something he did, then here's something he did. Now, is he good or evil? And it's
Mm.
that's with the zone. It's a toss up to Porcupine. You know, maybe he felt in some sense that the zone was malevolent. Maybe it is malevolent to give someone their deepest desire, knowing that their deepest desire is actually wicked or is going to strip something else from them.
Okay, so if we look at this in terms of, so to me, in my POV, right, the the part about the innermost desire would say more about the individual themselves than it would about the zone or God or what have you, right? Because it's not, to me, the whole thing of like, if you could go in a room and you could be granted your innermost desire, and your innermost desire is bad, or it's something that would make you want to kill yourself because you're aware of it, does that really say anything about the person who granted it, or does it say something about you?
It's very tough because I get the sense if he hung himself because he realized that his innermost desire was something other than what he wanted it to be. So it almost sounds like there's an internal war in himself. So it couldn't
Right.
have been what he truly wanted if, after having gotten it, it caused him such grief. He was trying to kind of will this want that he believed that he wanted, that he knew was right to want, into existence. It's almost like your innermost desire is a zone, that it's constantly changing and you can't keep track of it. And, what you want, this because you want to want something sometimes and you hate that you want something other times. So I don't know how much it actually even ends up saying about the person. It may end up saying a lot about their lack of kind of internal discipline or sober self-assessment. But it's very hard to pin someone down in that way.
Well, so for this particular part of the conversation, for if we're talking about the room and we're talking about the desire part, which to me is the most compelling portion of the film, I wrote down as I was watching it yesterday, the way that the desire is defined by the film is the desire that has made you suffer most, your sincerest wish. Okay, so it's like the essence of your true nature. The stalker says it is within you, it governs you, yet you are ignorant of it. So the magic here to me is the idea that we could be all walking around and not know what we want most, and yet it be the thing that is controlling all of our actions. And then further on, that if it were revealed to us that our lives would be ruined as a result, just shows the chasm between our own self-knowledge truly and then our presumption of what we are, right?
Mm-hmm.
It would have to mean that.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
That we're out of alignment with our true selves.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that's very scary. But it also seems inevitable, sadly.
So it's just completely hopeless. So do you think that we are capable of knowing what that is?
Sometimes. No, yes, sometimes I would say. I mean, it's obvious to me that sometimes what was really governing me and driving my actions was hidden to me. Uh, but I think it's been obvious to me at others.
Right. And the zone kind of in this context of the film doesn't necessarily lead them towards any deeper understanding of themselves.
You don't think so?
Well, I mean, it's basically just saying, what if you just had this proposition? Would you take it? It's more like, because they enter into the zone and they become more philosophical about it, it causes these conversations. It causes the men to be more vulnerable as time goes on, but it doesn't necessarily guide. And I think this is where I'd be interested in what you think about this sort of detachment, because if we're talking about a sentient presence that doesn't interfere versus a lot of religions where the god of the religion or the higher power is something that is a relationship, like you can uh have a back and forth about. How much do you think that impacts? Not having that at all in this film is what leaves them hopeless.
Okay, yeah, it's just I'm not sure if they don't have it at all. Um, so you get the sense that they could have it and refuse it a little bit uh, by going into the room at the very least. But yeah, even in so in my faith, which is Christian, uh, even though you can have this back and forth with God, it's not something that you can control or guarantee. If you think of like the story of Job, there is sometimes where there's a sense in which you're not receiving any blunt guidance. Um, so it's very tough. I'm not sure if that was the case with them in the zone, if they were left out to dry. In fact, I think the stalker himself had the sense that all this richness was available to them, but they didn't have the faith or
The
the
belief.
belief, yeah, the right mindset.
Right. So you think that it was available, but they didn't take it, and that's why the stalker was so upset at the end, because he was like, "Why am I taking all these people to what he perceives as the solution if nobody's going to take it?" Like, that's what he says to his wife at the end. Like, why do I continue to, like, nobody believes anymore? Like, what am I doing? Like, why am I trekking along? And then they get there and they don't even want to go in.
Right.
So there's this sense of, what is the step? Like, what is blocking belief, basically, to get from literally one room to the other? What is required? Because there's a line about prayer there where the stalker says, like, how hard is it to pray? Like, all you have to do is have just such a minimal amount of willingness. And he was like, well, it's your pride that gets in the way. Your pride prevents you from praying, right? And so because they can't make that step, but to him it is a small step, but for most people it is quite the leap, right? If it's difficult to do. So that in itself is a fascinating question that the film is asking.
Yeah, and I think it's especially difficult for people who are capable of being very honest with themselves, because what? Yeah, how hard can prayer be? Sure, I'll give it a try. Why not? But I think people that are honest with themselves, probably people that are honest with themselves, struggle more with pride. It's sort of a two-edged sword there.
Yeah, and I think also it's difficult when you are sort of paradoxically, maybe, that I've noticed that when people are deep thinkers and they are very they're intellectuals and they're well read, um it might not even be that they don't want to believe, or there's some attraction there just to spirituality in general. Like I'm even outside of Christianity, just an attraction to wanting to have faith in something, right? There is that hesitance of how do you go from the rational to even saying something under your breath. That would be a very difficult step for someone mentally.
Do you think that belief is ultimately a choice, or it's the kind of internal phenomenon when your uh, plausibility mechanisms are going off?
Okay, so I am heavy into like the 12 and 12. So I'm like into the 12 steps and 12 traditions literature right now. And this is literally what step 2 is, which is that you believe that, I mean, in that language, it's a higher power, right? But I'm just going to say God for the sake of it, because God can be anything to anyone. Okay. So I'm just going to say, for the sake of argument, that this just means something that we don't know and that isn't ourselves. That it's literally that you believe that that's what will restore you to sound mindedness. I think that, and this is what it says, the only way that you will be at a willingness state to even consider such thing is a combination of humility and an open mind. So you have to be at a point where you are like, I am not able to do things myself anymore. And because of that, my mind is more open to the idea, even just the idea that we are not the end all be all is difficult to come to without humility, I think.
Yeah,
But then that's like, what causes humility? I mean, what compels somebody to even be in that state?
yeah. You think a person has to, what you said about the saying the thing under their breath, it at least has to be a willingness to play the part of belief.
Right. So when they're outside of the room, it's like the stalker gets upset, but then the whole rest of the movie, the writer and the professor are saying all their reasons for not wanting to do that. Like, I'm fine as I am, everything's hopeless anyway. What does it matter? I'm going to be forgotten anyway, no matter what I produce. That sort of gets back to what you were saying in your review about art and imitation. Like, wanting to be inspired to make something that's your own and thinking it's easy, and then realizing how difficult it is to say anything true.
Yeah, I think especially with that, with the whole imaging God thing or creating, you have to, and most creators will tell you this, you have to be willing to fail. And there's always going to be this overarching extent to which you are certainly going to fail, or you can only fail. Um, that sequence that you're talking about, where they're getting very nihilistic, especially the writer, I think, and he's like, none of this is going to be remembered. It doesn't matter. It's very Ecclesiastes, and
Nothing new under the sun, you mean?
nothing new under the sun. And what good is it that I do all this toil and produce these great cities when the person after me is going to come, and who knows what they're going to do with it? And yeah, one generation to the next is the person is forgotten, and so it ultimately it doesn't mean anything. But then the conclusion of the matter in the end is fear the Lord and keep His commandments. It's like, you can't do anything. You can't know anything for sure. Everything you do is going to pass away. You're going to die. You're going to be judged. Fear the thing. You can't do everything is vanity. Now fear the Lord and keep His commandments. So there's always this sense in which, yes, my hands are tied. I'm going to fail, and yet I have to do this. I have to persist.
Right. So then the question becomes, perhaps, okay, if we can see the vanity of it or the short-termness or whatnot, and we could sort of get past this obsession with legacy, or making our mark or whatnot, uh, then it's a question of quality, perhaps. Like, how can we have quality of life knowing that there is so much suffering and knowing all these hard truths about its transience.
Yeah, I like when the stalker's talking about when you're creating something, it can't just be to create, it can't just be for you or for nothing. You have to answer the question of why and for whom. And that's always going to speak to the quality more than anything else. And that's there in the hidden desires. It's the telos of that's governing everything you're doing. So the why is always going to be there. And I love that they add the for whom, because nobody exists in a vacuum and no man's an island. And yeah, I think that's the two big questions for doing anything.
Right, and there's a great passage that you quoted in your review that I really love about how it's right when so the film starts in part 1, which is basically them trying to trek to the room. Then part 2 starts when they are getting closer to it and they're sort of in that sewer area, which is so masterfully done in terms of it feeling endless. Just visually, this whole thing. I wrote down one of the things that the DP said was that this movie is 142 shots, and he was like, most movies are like 3,000. So the pacing of this and how the camera will rest on something is meditative in the sense that it allows you to project your own thoughts onto the canvas of it. And you start thinking about what they're saying and being able to experience your own memories of them. So talk a little bit to that idea of like how interactive the movie is, as much as it is sort of otherworldly, if you can.
Yeah, Ebert talked about that in a really good way. Although I think it was for Solaris. He said, I'm gonna butcher what he said. Me and some friends were listening to an album together one time, and it was Lord Huron, I think. And at the end, there was like this 10-minute track, and all of us were like, this is too long. It's boring. It's a weird way to end what was a great album." And he's like, "No, you really can't. This is why people should sit through the credits. Probably, you really can't buy that kind of time. You had 10 minutes there to reflect on everything that had just come before it. Uh, so you can either check out and say, I can't wait to this, prolonged, the back of the writer's head as he's going down the trolley, I could just check out there, or you can say, okay, what have I heard? What have I seen? What am I about to see? Where am I in all of
Mm.
this? Yeah, the DP, the way that he talks about it is good. You get to ask yourself, where am I in all of this?
Yeah, well, and this movie also was famously just kept being derailed. They lost like halfway through they lost their what they had done, and then there was like an earthquake. Tarkovsky ended up like completely rehashing and restructuring his idea of Stalker because it was originally going to be a hustler, and then he was like a holy fool, like you said, who actually genuinely cared about what he was doing in his vocation. That scene where he begs them to understand his significance in the zone is really, really powerful, I think. Where he's like, I'm not anything. I can't fix my own life, but like I do know how to guide people here. So there is also that kind of tragedy idea of like, what if you were really, really passionate about something and wanting people to see it and you weren't appreciated for it? Like, how painful would that be? And how do you sort of get past that? Like, how do you become the person where that it's you're showing it to people and then you let it go, like it's out of your hands, and it's not important to be personally validated. It's just important that you did it honestly.
Yeah, and especially with them, I mean, he's trying to destroy it. I think in that just before that moment where he was in despair, it's very similar to, if you think, he's almost like a John the Baptist type. There, I think I can't remember the term he uses for himself in this. Like he's a flea or I can't remember what it was, but some
Mm,
low thing. And it's like you think of John the Baptist with the not worthy to tie your sandals, and all the time he's just trying to point people, this is the lamb who takes away the sin of the world, and they just want to kill this guy and they want to arrest him, and just how like this is like I realized how special this is, and you just want to destroy it. It must be the most agonizing thing. And you had Jesus saying about John, there's no person born of woman who is as great as John the Baptist. And why? If he felt in and of himself he wasn't worthy to tie the sandals, but he was pointing towards the the ultimate thing. If you could think of the zone of the room as the ultimate thing in the reality of this movie.
I also really strongly thought of The Matrix when the phone rings.
That's
That
such a weird
that
scene.
Yeah, but they're just like I mean, there's no way probably that wasn't somewhat influenced because they literally have a phone ringing in the to get to combine the two realms or whatnot. But it's that idea of like the like Morpheus as Stalker is kind of an interesting idea because Morpheus is so zen about it. So it's like I have the answer. It's in the form of a pill. You can take it or not, but he himself is not plagued by this idea of having the right answer and someone choosing not to take it. And I think that says a lot that the stalker is the opposite of that, and therefore he's ruining his own life.
What do you think it says about being about the stalker? This is a very interesting comparison.
That the the goal of the person who believes should be, I'm here to say what I think is true, and then that's it. Like, I'm not here to be militant or condemn or convince anyone. All I'm supposed to do is say, here's like it's I almost liken it to like a medical condition. I had X disease. I found the cure. I'm going to share it because now I know that because I was healed. But there's so much of religion that thinks it's their job to convince, and it's so much more. That's the posture of the stalker. Like, I'm here to convince you, and you're like upsetting me that you're not convinced. Whereas Morpheus is like, hey, do what you want. I'm just letting you know.
That's so interesting. You think the stalker cared too much in the end?
At the end, he's like crying in his bed
Feverish and maybe dying. Who knows?
and maybe dying, and then he's like, I don't want to do this anymore, literally. And then she's like, well, would you like me to go with you? You know, like, we'll go with you. Don't worry. It's okay. But I mean, to me, that's the pride coming back, right? We're so precious about being listened to that we want like the full credit when it's like it should be the thing itself that matters, not us.
Maybe, you can almost imagine a world where he was like that kind of going in, and he just, time after time, people would just like keep tossing, it's like, I'm not going to go in there. And he's just like at his end. Because
Mm.
he's brushing his teeth, you can tell he's getting excited to go in there, it's
Uh-huh.
like, this could be it,
Yeah.
and another nothing.
So, Mitch, what is your I don't know what your opinion is because we didn't discuss this, but what is your take on the ending with his daughter?
I don't know. This time when I was watching it, I was like, oh, I think that means the stalker killed himself or died. Because
Oh,
just
wow.
there's the three glasses and the tall one topples off. But if at the end of my review, I think I kind of stand there like this could be anything, and people have suggested everything. But to answer, just so I have an answer, that was what I thought this time, and I don't like that thought very much.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go out on a limb here.
I'm glad.
It's a little wild,
Yes, this is good.
uh, but because the film starts and ends with women, which I think is very interesting. Because I mean, the first line is by a woman, and then the last frame is a child who's female, I think. Um, says something about the nature of their understanding, or at least Tarkovsky's emphasis. But what I think happened is that when they took the kid back to the room that she actually went in, and the desire of her heart was telekinesis.
Oh, that's nice. That's good.
Like as a way to survive in the world because she's deformed
Mm-hmm.
and she can't walk.
Mm-hmm.
I think it makes sense that her innermost desire would be some sort of mechanism or superpower that she could use that would keep her at the level of being able to function in
I
society.
like that. You can imagine that's a very childlike innermost desire to have. Like I want to be able to move
Exactly.
stuff. That's cool. That's interesting. But
And
to
I
end on
haven't
that
read it,
is very
anything,
strong.
but
But so yeah, then the ending is that much more powerful because we know that she believed, she went in, and
exactly.
he got to see his daughter
Because
do that.
up to that point, and I mean, okay, nobody like get mad at me because this is just me, literally. But uh, yes, that would also give this idea, which is kind of comforting, that somebody actually went in there and that the result of the room was good, because up until this point, we have only heard about it being a bad thing. Like Porcupine,
Mhm.
which was the stalker's mentor, or the stalker, is the one who hung himself. And then there was another person, he said, who got rich and then he killed himself. So it's a nice idea, in my opinion, to end on the idea that somebody gained from it, and also, it would be apropos to have it be a child, like faith,
Yes.
like a child.
He even what who does he say will benefit from the zone? The meek, not the hard, but the soft. In that great
He said,
monologue.
"Strength is worthless.
Yeah, that's.
Softness."
I like your reading a lot. I think that's very good. It's much better than
Oh,
mine. My
oh,
my
Mitch,
latest one, it's just dismal as this basement wall.
who is interviewing who? I want to know in this
You are the
episode.
stalker as leading us through this zone. Well done. I'm the professor
Uh,
going back for his
you're the
backpack.
yeah, you're going back for your stuff. Um, I also like you had a quote that I wrote down, um, that about faith atrophying. One of the things that the stalker laments at the end is that their faith has atrophied through lack of use. Um, and so there's this just this film is constantly coming back to this idea of like, why don't you believe? What's stopping you from belief? And then if you have any, what would stop you from using it all the time? I think those central ideas, and then everything sort of revolving around all this other phenomena, and putting people in a space that's safe to contemplate such things. It ends with the writer crying, looking out the window. So I think there is this sadness of like not being able to quite make that jump, but wanting to. I don't know. That's what I got from that scene.
Yeah, that is very sad. But I still feel like there's this sense in my most generous estimation of say the writer and the professor. I do think too there's a sense in which they believed, because I don't think they were really going in there for inspiration and for science, or even really in the
Or
end
to destroy the
to destroy
room.
even in the end for that, and they both walked out of there with all of this in their memory. So to go on that journey to put down the cash for it to dodge the bullets to get there. I mean, I think that they did believe, but there's a real tragic sense about they're not going in. I think too. The faith can atrophy. I mean, through lack of use. That makes me think of. I don't want to jump any guns here, so pull me back if I am. It makes me think of the pain kind of premise in how this movie kind of speaks to that, because I remember kind of taking a walk with a friend of mine, and I asked him where this kind of sense of awe goes that we have as young people, and you just look at the tiniest thing and you're just amazed by it. You want to just observe it and look it over and get to the bottom of it and turn over stones and look inside logs and where does it go? And his answer to me was probably what it is if you get in the habit of dulling pain or avoiding the feeling of pain, if you can't have it both ways. You're going to dull the whole mechanism. So
Right.
the same mechanism that feels the wonder and awe and joy is going to be dulled. And humans are very much in that habit of
Anesthetizing.
mhm, mhm. So I think there's that the lack of use or the avoidance of using something, whether it's for pride or for moments of doubt or because there's something better on offer. Yeah, it's always putting that thing at hazard that you're not using, and sometimes that's a good thing because you don't want to be using it. But
It's kind of like what the wife says at the end when she talks directly to the camera,
mm-hmm,
and she talks about how there's a lot of suffering in their lives because he does this,
mm-hmm,
and they're not necessarily happy, but there is a bittersweetness to their life
mm-hmm.
that she would rather have than it be gray. That's her verbiage.
Yeah, I think
So it's like, yeah, go ahead.
after you.
Well, I was going to say that in our culture, right, there is this avoidance, there is addiction, there is numbing the self to the world, self to pain, self to others, to consciousness, right? Because life is hard. But like you said, you are using that in a negative way in a sense because it blocks access to these awestruck moments. So she is saying, as much as this is painful for us, it creates more depth of happiness than would otherwise be there. And so it becomes worth it in a sense.
Yeah, I think her whole monologue is the linchpin to the whole movie. Really, she says that bittersweet happiness is better than a dull gray life, and she says without sorrow there's no real joy. And she's the one that's kind of picked up her cross. She's willing to suffer, and she knows exactly what it costs up front, and she just has a real sense about what matters. And I think Tarkovsky does too, because the way that he talks about. And so, yeah, when I first read this, very much when I first watched this, very much my focus was like what this has to say about creating. But Tarkovsky doesn't separate creation from pain at all, and he says that art in making it is preparing you for death, and you get all of these kind of time honored. You get these powerful images like the lamb was slain at the creation of the world. And so some people talk about the moments on Calvary with Christ as a type of creative moment, that this is the moment that the world was actually created. This was like the sixth day.
Mm.
And then there was true rest following that. And so I think that her being willing to suffer and sorry, my wife is there making my daughter laugh. Uh,
It's okay.
uh, the and the stalker's willingness to suffer, and the writer and the professor's hesitancy to suffer, but ultimate suffering. That's the whole thing. You kind of like when your lips are chapped, you gotta smile anyway, and it's gonna pop them apart and it's gonna hurt, but like that's the way to get on in life. Is at times you have to accept the burden and the yoke and find in the end that it's ultimately somehow easy and light.
Right. You're reminding me there's one of my favorite books I've ever read is called Witness by Whitaker Chambers. And there's a line in there where he says, every man hangs on the cross of himself. So there is this marriage, I think, between what you're describing, which is sort of carrying it, like the suffering, like carrying the cross, which is like Pilgrim's Progress, back to that, where you have a burden and you're carrying it, and it's not easy, but it's sort of your lot to do because the world is as it is. But then there's also that we as humanity, if we aren't constantly dying to self, in the sense that we have these moments like you and I are having, like these conversations that are thoughtful and reflective, and you're sort of checking yourself and thinking, how can you be, to quote the 12 steps, happily and usefully whole is the goal, right? Then it does require that sort of death. And I think that that's a solution to why people don't want to go in the room, because they're not doing the things that would allow them to know themselves really.
Oh yeah, that brings it back to, yeah, you have to have sort of a disciplined habit, a discipline of self assessment, and that can be very painful. That's very painful for me. I don't like assessing myself. I don't like to have others assess me, because I know that what I find there is painful and difficult and needs addressing. And yeah, I think you're onto something there.
Yes, but I think that that's like a pain that's instructive
Mm-hmm.
rather than
That's really good that you're going in that direction, and it's the direction that the stalker goes, because he said nothing is meaningful unless you know the why or for whom, and if the why and the for whom are really valid. So you, when the writer gets near the room, he's kind of putting on this crown of thorns, and
mm-hmm.
you don't know this, but you think maybe the professor is going to this is a suicide mission that he's on with the bomb. I mean, it seems like a pretty explosive bomb. Uh, so there's, I sometimes think like, okay, if the devil gets up on the cross, or if a sinner, let's say, gets up on the cross, all that happens is a crucifixion. If there's not like a true direction, like if there's not a salvation at the end of this, if there's Christ endures the cross for the joy that's set before him. So, like, yeah, pain for the sake of pain, or pain for a wicked reason, it's a no go.
It's a useless thing. It's also sort of the, I read last week about Last Temptation of Christ, Mike D'Angelo's review, where he's saying that which Dan and I didn't cover, but I think is a great point, that the blasphemous part of the Last Temptation, which people don't often talk about, is this idea that if Jesus didn't die, but people professed that he did, that profession, like, oh no, he did die and he came back from the dead, don't worry, it happened, but let's pretend that it didn't happen, that they're equating those two things. Like it's just as meaningful to say that it was made up as if he did it, because all that we need to believe is that it happened, not that something actually did happen, which is the blasphemous part, according to what Christianity's saying, because like you're saying, that event actually did something. It's not the idea of the event that did something. It's the event itself, right? So I think you're onto something there, where it's like something real needs to happen in order for real change to occur.
Yeah.
It can't just be hypotheticals or theoreticals or whatnot, but it does start with a desire.
Yeah, it can't happen on paper. It could start on paper, but it's got to transcend that. Something real has to happen. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, now I'll say this. I've got 2 more points, and then one of them I'm going to put you on the spot for.
Nuts.
So I know you're excited about it. One of the things that I like at the end is the dog, because when they go into the zone, there's this dog that sort of follows them around. The DP talking about the dog is really humorous. But that he just said, we couldn't control this dog. So whenever the dog was like willing to come up to us, we had to start shooting. Anyway, when the movie starts with the 3 of them, with the stalker, the writer, and the professor, they're in a bar and they're chatting. when the movie ends, they're in the bar and they're chatting. So you could technically say, did they even go? Did anything even happen?
Mhm.
Was it all a
Mhm.
dream? But because the dog is
Mhm.
there with them in the bar, we are, it's not the end of Inception where we have no, we're like, did it happen? Did not. Okay, so the dog, to me, is a symbol that I quote this poem. It's very short, so I'm going to read it in my review by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. I want to read it to you guys just because I think this is such an interesting idea. But this relates directly to that image. So this poem's called "What If You Slept." Uh, what if you slept, and what if in your sleep you dreamed, and what if in your dream you went to heaven, and there plucked a strange and beautiful flower, and what if when you awoke you had that flower in your hand? What then? So it's this idea of like something extraordinary happens to you. You have proof that it happened to you. What do you do with it? And I think that's what we're left with Stalker. Is like, if we were to stumble upon the truth, what would we do?
Mm.
And the dog is that proof, as the rose petals are in that
Well,
poem.
you saying that and making that connection with what the DPD said in the Coleridge poem. It's so sad, kind of, to see what they do with it. Or the writer's like, I've got five dogs. I can't take it. Uh,
Oh yeah.
oh no.
Just makes it about himself. Well, I think that's why it doesn't end on him. It ends on the girl.
Mm.
It ends on his daughter. Okay, so Mitch, I'm gonna ask you this. After seeing Stalker for the second time, and in light of your thoughts in this conversation, would you go in the room yourself?
I will say yes as an act of faith. There's I could try to be more honest and self-assess, but I've already said I hate doing that. So I'm just gonna say yes, I would go in. No,
Okay.
I mean the thing is, like I said, the want, your innermost desire, is very hard to pin down. It's very squirmy, and it
Mm,
shifts and it changes, and it's often very dark. So I don't know. I feel like you got to go in.
I feel
Maybe
like you got to go ahead.
maybe the guys were the heroes, the writer and the professor, because they had the wisdom to know that if they went in there, that it was going to be bad.
Yeah, there's a line in there that I wrote down where they say, "How do I put a name to what I want?" So there is also this sense of like, maybe it's not necessarily that we don't know what we want. Maybe we just don't have the ability to articulate it properly.
That's a very common theme, I think, in Tarkovsky's work. I think he's always, uh, sometimes explicitly, but always kind of dealing with this Babel, the Tower of Babel kind of phenomena, and the difficulty. Have you seen, which other Tarkovskys have you seen?
Mirror, The Sacrifice, Solaris.
Nostalgia?
No, I haven't
Because
seen
that
that.
one, that's very much the thesis of that one, but I think it's very much in Solaris too. And I need to rewatch The Mirror, and I haven't seen The Sacrifice, but I think that that's something he
Mm,
deals with a lot, language and the incommunicability of it. And a little here with the
images.
music thing was like, yeah, people can't understand each other, but think about music. That kind of transcends the Babel curse.
Right. There's a great line there about like when the stalker is talking about music and he's saying, there's like a line that says what chord in us resonates with its harmonies. So it's like this idea of like art, film, music, these things are able to reach us in a deeper way that's beyond language. And then we try to use language, literature, speaking, conversing to bring out what that feels like or that description of transformation. And it's difficult
Oh, we
sometimes.
have to. And I like this notion that yes, even though you're incapable of doing it to an extent. You're not going to paint it with the right brush, but you still have to try.
Right. Because it's sort of our way of knowing ourselves. It's an interesting question to me with just like letterboxed users in general of like when you watch a film, do you write about the film in order to know yourself, or do you write about the film to understand the film? Like, is it an exercise of self as much as self getting at what you think as much as it is about what is the film saying? Because I think for a lot of us, it's a dual purpose. Like you're understanding the film in a more deep way, but you're also trying to get at your uncovering something about your own experience and bringing that into consciousness almost through the act of writing.
Yeah, that's not a bad way to. Well, it's a very pragmatic, utilitarian, maybe the wrong word, way to approach movies for something real to happen as a result of them, like you were saying earlier, and not just a consumption act.
Or escapism,
Mhm.
or just pure
Like
entertainment.
what now?
Yeah. I think it depends on the film too, because a lot of us do it for different reasons at different times. I mean, sometimes you just literally want to turn something on and not think about it. But I just mean like if you're thoughtfully writing about something.
Yeah, you said you would go in the room.
Yes. But only at this point in my life would I even consider that. Not before. I would have before recently I would have done the wrong thing. It's almost like saying, are you ready to, on a smaller scale, be with Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade? Are you a person who would choose the right cup?
Oh, I mean, shoot. If you put the question that way, I better not drink. But the uh, the thing with why do you? So the stalker, he said that he didn't go in because it was wrong for the stalker to
It
have a
was
mercenary kind of
right.
intention. But that's interesting. Maybe we should just be stalkers. I don't know.
Yeah, that one I think is more that he believed in whatever. That's kind of like an oral tradition thing to me. It seems like the rules of
Oh, I see. Yeah,
stalkerhood
that's cool.
were like passed down, and he was just like his stalker did this, and then his stalker did
But
this.
his stalker
So
went in.
I know. So then that's a good point. So then it's like, well, would he have? And maybe your interpretation, maybe both of our interpretations are right of the ending. That maybe our stalker went in and died, and then maybe she went in the room too and then got her
Oh
gift.
man, that gives it a kind of a dark twist because if you think of the porcupine, you might think, okay, I'm going to break the rules of stalker. I'm going to go in. I'm going to save my brother, and then he gets this wealth. Maybe she went in and say, I'm going to save my dad, and then she gets telekinesis. This is
Or maybe the desire of his heart was like sacrificial,
mm,
like he felt like he needed to die in order for her to
mm,
live.
mm.
I mean, you could kind of take this any way that's sort of, I don't know. It's kind of a fun exercise, like a nerdy exercise, but still,
Yes, the
nonetheless,
zone
to just
is the
speculate.
interpretations of the stalker are like the zone. They morph and change with where you are
Mm,
and why you're
exactly.
going there.
Yes. So, everybody watch this movie ASAP. If you have seen it already, rewatch it. Um, I found it to be much more rewarding a second time, and it's full of things to think about that are not in a lot of films. So just based on that alone, I think it's worth visiting.
For sure.
Yeah.
It is a burden, but a rewarding burden.
Yes. With that, thank you,
Thank
Mitch.
you.
It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.
And we'll see you at the movies.